S.S.S. Behar, Tovshin Pei Beis. Thanks once again, Bikur Cholim, for the beautiful accommodations that we have each and every week. Tonight, instead of a 7 or 8 course meal, it looks like we have about a 15 course meal here for the Chashva volunteers of Bikur Cholim. And of course, all of that is only to just appreciate what these wonderful people do for our community. And it's of course very apropos that this week and this year we're going to speak about the beginning of our Parsha, the beginning of Parshas Behar, which talks about the inyan of Shemitah. And we all know that this year, Tavshin Pei Beis, is a year of Shemitah. And Shemitah really is, says in Nesivos Shalom, the ultimate display of emunah and bitachon. Imagine not to go out and work in your fields at all. It's your parnasa, it's your work, it's your livelihood, it's everything that you do, and you give it all up. You give it all up. You don't do any work in your field. You don't do any work at all for the entire 7th year. And we know, of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Eretz Yisrael to Klal Yisrael, a very, very special gift that we have, and that's Eretz Yisrael. And Chazal tell us that this special gift of Eretz Yisrael that we have is actually in the schus of the Shavsa Ha'aretz Shabbos Lashem. The pasuk at the beginning of this week's parsha, that the land should rest, it should be Shabbos for the land during the 7th year, and that's really the schus kiyum, the schus that we get to keep Eretz Yisrael. Chazal tell us is in the schus of Shemitah, and really without Shemitah we don't have a schus to have Eretz Yisrael. As we touched on a little bit last week, when we spoke about the different neshamas of the world, we mentioned that Eretz Yisrael is actually the neshama of the entire Bria. All the lands, the entire creation, Eretz Yisrael is the neshama of all of that. And the Nesivos Shalom explains that we need to remember and we need to understand that Eretz Yisrael was not given to us by HaKadosh Baruch Hu as just a place to settle, as a convenient and good place to live. As nice as it is, and as beautiful as Eretz Yisrael is, that wasn't the purpose that Hashem was looking for a place for His nation, for Klal Yisrael, to occupy, to land, to live in. That's not what Hashem wanted from Eretz Yisrael. Because had that been the purpose, there were plenty of other lands that we could have lived in. Kadosh Baruch Hu could have settled Klal Yisrael in the United States. Hashem could have settled us in Uganda. He could have settled us anywhere. But that wasn't the purpose. Hashem put us in Eretz Yisrael because Eretz Yisrael is the neshama of the world. And if Eretz Yisrael is the neshama of the world, that is where the chosen nation of Hashem belongs. We're there with and for a purpose, not just because we're looking for a place to pitch our tent. And Eretz Yisrael is a land of Kedusha. It's a land of holiness. And it's specifically created for Klal Yisrael to live there with Kedusha, to live there in holiness. And the whole schus of us being there, being in Eretz Yisrael, is contingent on keeping Shemitah. The Or Chaim HaKadosh says, and we mentioned it a number of times, I think we actually touched on it in the last week or two also, that the world we know exists because of Shabbos Kodesh. And we said this a number of times, that Shmira Shabbos, by keeping Shabbos, that renews the world for the next 6 days. And it's a concept that everybody who's here for the shir and who's been by the shir the last year that we've spoken about and we've elaborated and we've expounded upon, and this inyan that the world was only supposed to be around for 6 days, and it is supposed to be around for 6 days. And each Shabbos, when we keep Shabbos, we charge a rapid charge into the batteries of the world to give the world another 6 days of life until the next Shabbos. And Shemitah, what we're speaking about this week in our Parsha, Shemitah actually works the same way on a different level. Shemitah is not just a mitzvah. The whole existence of Eretz Yisrael comes from keeping Shemitah. The right to exist in the land of Eretz Yisrael for the next 6 days, much as for the next 6 years, much as Shabbos does it for 6 days, the mitzvah of Shemitah and keeping Shemitah gives us the right to be in Eretz Yisrael for the next 6 years after Shemitah. Hashem gave us the land of Eretz Yisrael on the condition that we do the Ratzon Hashem and that we trust that it's really Hashem who runs the world, and it's Hashem who says in the Torah, V'tzivisi es birchasi, Hashem will give a bracha to those that keep Shemitah, and it is HaKadosh Baruch Hu who really is the one who supports and sustains us. It's not koichi v'aitzim yadi, it's not my work, our job, our salary, our efforts. None of that is what really supports us. What supports us is the bracha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem, who supports and sustains us through every single day and every single thing that we need. And not keeping Shemitah is a rejection of this principle, is a rejection of those facts. And it's interesting to note that Chazal tell us, Mishnah Perkei Avos, also that Golus comes to the world for not keeping Shemitah. Why would what's the relation between Golus and Shemitah? With what we're talking about, we can understand the Mishnah. Because it's not really that it's like a punishment that we go into Golus. What it is if we don't keep Shemitah, Memela, we don't have a schus to be in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is not ours if we don't keep Shemitah. It's contingent upon us keeping Shemitah. And Nesivos Shalom points out that the Torah first tells us at the beginning of the Parsha, V'shavsa ha'aretz Shabbos l'Hashem. And then after that, only after telling us that the land of Eretz Yisrael has to rest, then the Torah tells us how it works. That the Torah tells us that you work for 6 years, and then, but the first thing the Torah says is the most important part of the mitzvah, V'shavsa ha'aretz Shabbos l'Hashem. Because the Torah is telling us this yesod of emunah, that with the lesson of Shemitah is for us to understand that it's not our work. We don't have to work in order for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give us parnasa. We don't have to work in order for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to support us. Hashem runs the world, and He is the one who sustains and supports us. And once we know that principle, once we know that that is the way it is, then we can study the laws of how many years to work before and what we have to do before Shemitah, after Shemitah. All of the rest is just elaborating on that. And we see the same idea really as we keep comparing B'shavsa ha'aretz Shabbos l'Hashem, the inyan of Shemitah and the inyan of Shabbos. The same thing by Shabbos. Before anything, the Torah tells us Zochores Yom HaShabbos l'Kadashai, telling us to remember the day of Shabbos to make it holy. And what's it telling us? Before we say, because normally I would think the Torah should tell us first, work for 6 days, then rest on the Shabbos. The Torah first tells us, Zochores Yom HaShabbos l'Kadashai, and then we say, Sheishis Yomim Tavoid Vasisa Chol Malachtecha. Why? Because that lesson is teaching us the first thing you have to know is this yesod of emunah, that it's Hashem who created the world. It's Hashem who created everything. It's Hashem who runs the world. Once you internalize and you have that emunah, then we could get into all the ramifications and laws about working for 6 days. Much the same as it works by Shemitah, because emunah, once you internalize that lesson of emunah, that is the yisoid hayisoidas. That's the foundation that we have to build on. And as we know, b'schus emunah nigalu avoseinu mimitzrayim. We spoke about it Pesach time also, that when it came to Yetzias Mitzrayim, there was only one schus that they had. They did not have anything else. They were the Memtes Shari Tumah, but the one thing they held on to was emunah. And b'schus emunah, b'schus that emunah alone, they got out of Mitzrayim. And it's going to be the same way, hopefully, when we go out of our gullus soon. An interesting thing the Nesivos Shalom tells us, interesting observation. You know, the teva of all other lands, the teva of every other country, every other place, is that the more you work the land, the more effort you put in. You're not lazy, right? You go out to the field and you work, you plant more, you till, you sow, you do everything in the land. The more you do, the more the land is going to produce. You put in effort, and that's the way Hashem set up the world, that you have to work the land in order for it to produce. But in this special land of Eretz Yisrael, where the Torah tells us, Eretz Asher Hashem Alekecha Doirei Shoisa Tamid Einei Hashem Alekecha Ba. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always seeking out the well-being and to check up on Eretz Yisrael. Hashem is always, his eyes, Kaviyachal, are always on Eretz Yisrael. This special land, it works just the opposite. The Torah tells us, V'hoisa Shabbos ha'oretz lochem liachla, that the Shabbos ha'oretz, the not working the land, you have emunah in Hashem, and you put everything down, and you don't work, and you understand that it's not your work, it's not your job, it's not your boss, it's nothing else that supports you besides HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You understand that lesson? So in Eretz Yisrael, V'hoisa Shabbos ha'oretz lochem liachla, you're going to be supported by the fact, the less you work, from not working during Shemitah and just giving the parnasa over totally to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's lochem le'achla. That's what brings you to parnasa. In all other lands where Hashem doesn't tell you to stop working the land, so you have to work and work and work, and the more you work, the more you put in, that's what you're going to get out. But the Eretz Yisrael works the way a Jew is supposed to live your life. Eretz Yisrael works that when Hashem says stop working, makes no difference to you. Hashem's the one who's giving you the parnasa the 6 years. He's going to give it to you for the 7th year, and you can get the bracha for the 8th year. You're going to have all the brachas from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, despite what you think and what it seems like you're really doing. Eretz Yisrael works the way a Yid is supposed to go. And really, that's the lesson that every one of us can take out of this week's Parsha, whether we say that Shemitah is the Eraisa today, whether it's Min HaTorah, or as long as we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, it could be that Shemitah is the Rabbanon, or even us, where we are unfortunately in Chutz La'aretz, where certainly there is no mitzvah of Shemitah, but the lesson is still there. And this week of Parshas Behar, where we talk about the Shemitah, the lesson and the message in Chazal, the message from the Torah is, the message still needs to resonate, that we need to understand where our parnasa comes from. We need to understand who's feeding us. It's not us running around, waking up, working 23 hours a day, running, being on your phone and your emails and everything. That's not what's bringing you your parnasa. That's not what's doing it. And that's what we have to focus on this week, to understand that a Yid lives the lesson, the way of Eretz Yisrael. The more you listen to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the more you do the will of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the more you listen to the Torah, the more you're going to get, the more brachas you will get from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The lesson of Shemitah in this week's Parsha.